The Alpha King followed the quiet maid into the woods, and what he saw changed everything. In the quiet market town at the edge of the royal forest, the last rays of light glinted off the cobblestones, and the shadows grew long and thin. Among the townsfolk bustling to close their shops and secure their homes, there was one figure who drew no attention, yet held a presence that seemed to calm the world itself. She was a quiet maid, small in stature, with hair the color of chestnuts and eyes like forest streams, soft, clear, and still. She moved gracefully through the crowd, carrying a basket of herbs and flowers, exchanging nods with familiar faces but speaking very little. There was a serenity about her, a subtle aura that made even the most hurried merchants pause and breathe, even if only for a moment. Across the square, in a shadowed balcony above the town gate, the Alpha King watched. He was a figure both feared and revered. Tall, broad-shouldered, with hair like midnight and eyes sharp enough to pierce the soul, he had ruled the kingdom with a mix of iron and unmatched skill. Yet for all his power, there was something in him that others did not see, a loneliness that no gold, crown, or title could fill. The king's gaze had followed the maid for weeks, though he could not understand why. She did not flaunt herself, nor seek attention, yet he felt drawn to her quiet presence. Perhaps it was the way she moved through the world without fear, or perhaps it was something more, a faint warmth in her eyes, a kindness that reached into places long closed in his heart. That evening, as twilight began to thicken the shadows, he saw her slip silently through a narrow path at the edge of the forest. Her movements were light, yet purposeful, as if she knew exactly where she was going. Something in her step called to him, a curiosity, or perhaps a need he had long buried. Without thinking, he descended the balcony, moving swiftly and silently through the town streets. He reached the forest edge, the trees standing tall and dark, their branches intertwined like guardians of some secret world. The maid paused there for a moment, her hand brushing against the bark of an ancient oak, and the king saw her close her eyes, inhaling deeply, as though listening to the heartbeat of the forest itself. He stepped forward, careful not to startle her, yet the sound of a twig snapping under his foot betrayed him. The maid opened her eyes and looked directly at him. She did not flinch or step back. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, studying him with a calmness that made his pulse quicken. "You followed me," she said softly, her voice carrying in the quiet air like the faint rustle of leaves. I was curious," the king admitted, though the word felt small against the weight of what he truly felt. "Curious about you." The maid regarded him for a long moment, then nodded, almost imperceptibly. "The forest does not hide many secrets, but it holds what is necessary. You may walk if you are careful." The king stepped further into the forest, feeling the air shift around him. The shadows deepened, yet there was no fear here, only a strange, soothing energy that made his heart ache with a mixture of wonder and longing. The maid walked ahead, her steps confident, and he followed silently, feeling more drawn with every step. They reached a small clearing, bathed in the last golden light of the sun. Flowers and herbs grew in wild abundance, their scents mixing with the earthy smell of moss and soil. Birds chirped their final songs before nightfall, and in the distance, the faint glimmer of a stream caught the fading light. The maid knelt beside the stream, gathering water in a simple clay bowl. She hummed a soft tune, one that seemed to ripple through the air, making the forest itself pause and listen. The king watched her, captivated not just by her beauty, but by the serenity she carried, a stark contrast to his life of command, battle, and endless responsibility. "You are far from the town," the king said finally, breaking the quiet. "Why do you come here alone?" She looked up, her eyes meeting his. "This forest, it listens, it remembers, it heals, and sometimes it hides what the world cannot bear to see." He frowned slightly. "And what is it hiding now?" She smiled faintly, enigmatic. "Perhaps something about you, your majesty. Or perhaps something about me. Time will tell." There was a tension in her words, a quiet challenge that he did not expect. He was used to commanding, to being obeyed, to bending the world to his will. Yet here, in this forest, in the presence of a quiet maid who neither feared nor bowed to him, he felt a strange vulnerability. The stream's water reflected the first stars of the evening, and the king saw his own reflection for a moment. He saw the weight of his crown, the sharp lines of his face, the loneliness etched into his eyes. And then he looked at her, and he saw something he had not allowed himself to hope for, a light untouched by fear or ambition, a calm strength that did not seek to dominate, only to exist fully. "Why do you not fear me?" he asked quietly. The maid shrugged, setting the clay bowl down. "Fear serves those who want power. I have no need for it, but I can see the weight you carry. It is heavy, but it is yours." The king stepped closer, though he did not touch her. The air between them felt charged, almost alive, as if the forest itself had noticed his presence. "And what would you do if you saw this weight?" She did not answer immediately. Instead, she reached out and touched a small, silver flower growing at the edge of the stream. The petals shimmered faintly under her fingers. "I would not take it from you," she said finally. "I would show you it can be shared." The words struck him more deeply than he expected. Sharing, giving, trusting, these were things he had long forgotten. And in the quiet of the forest, under the fading light, he felt a flicker of something unfamiliar: hope. A sudden rustle in the trees made both of them pause. A shadow moved between the trunks, and the king instinctively stepped in front of her, his hand on the hilt of his sword. Yet the maid did not move back. She merely tilted her head, observing. The shadow passed, a small deer moving silently through the undergrowth. The tension melted, replaced by a quiet laughter from the maid. "You see," she said softly, "not everything here is dangerous. Sometimes the forest only tests you." The king lowered his hand from the sword, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I am not used to being tested," he admitted. "Perhaps it is time you are," she replied. Night began to fall fully, and the forest transformed. The darkness was not frightening, but alive with whispers, rustles, and the soft glow of fireflies. The king felt an unfamiliar desire to stay here, to learn, to watch, to listen. And more than that, he felt a strange pull toward the maid, not merely as a king to a subject, but as one human to another. Yet even as he felt this connection, a shadow of doubt crept into his heart. He knew the world beyond the forest would not allow this moment to last. The weight of his crown, his enemies, his responsibilities, they would all come for him. And the maid, she belonged to a world far simpler, far more fragile than his own. But for now, he could not think of that. He could only think of her and the strange, calming strength she carried, a strength he had not known he needed. "Will you walk with me a little further?" he asked, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. She nodded, and together they moved deeper into the forest, where the air smelled of earth and rain, and the shadows seemed to dance in welcome. The king followed her, not with the authority of a ruler, but with the curiosity of a man who had just glimpsed something beyond himself, something wild, mysterious, and unbearably beautiful. The forest thickened around them, the path disappearing under fallen leaves and twisted roots. Yet the king did not hesitate. He trusted her, though he did not know why. And she walked ahead, her steps sure and unwavering, as if the forest itself had chosen her as its guide. Then they reached a small glade where moonlight broke through the branches, illuminating a single ancient tree. Its trunk was twisted with age, its branches reaching high like arms stretching to the heavens. The maid stopped beside it and placed a hand gently on the bark. "This tree has seen centuries," she whispered. "It knows those who come with truth in their hearts." The king stepped closer, his eyes fixed on her. "And what does it see in me?" She looked up at him, her gaze unwavering. "A man burdened by power, searching for something he cannot name, and perhaps someone who can still be saved." For the first time in many years, the king felt the weight on his shoulders lift slightly, replaced by a stirring he had not felt in a long time, something warm, fragile, and full of possibility. The night deepened around them, and the forest whispered. The maid turned toward him, her eyes holding a quiet challenge, an unspoken promise. And in that moment, the Alpha King realized something he could not yet name, that this quiet maid had changed the rhythm of his world and perhaps of his heart. He followed her deeper into the woods, and though he did not know what awaited, he knew one thing with certainty. He would never be the same again. The deeper they went into the forest, the thicker the shadows grew. Moonlight struggled through the high canopy, creating patterns on the moss-covered ground like spilled silver. The air was cooler here, heavy with the smell of earth, wet leaves, and something older, something almost alive. The Alpha King walked beside the quiet maid, his steps careful, trying not to disturb the delicate balance of this hidden world. He had followed her for hours through twisting paths and under hanging vines, yet the forest seemed endless, a living maze that changed with each step. "Why do you know this forest so well?" the king asked at last, breaking the silence. The maid glanced at him briefly, a small smile touching her lips. "It listens," she said simply, "and I have learned to hear what it says. Most people only see the trees. They do not see the paths, the spirits, or the stories buried in the soil." He frowned. Stories buried in the soil. She bent to pick up a fallen leaf, its edges glowing faintly under the moonlight. "Every place has memories. The forest remembers those who walk here. Some come with peace, some with sorrow, some with power that even they do not understand." The king's heart skipped. Her words felt directed at him, though she did not speak his name. He had always been careful to hide his inner turmoil, his moments of weakness, even from himself. But she seemed to see him, through all the armor of a crown and sword, into the man beneath. They reached a small clearing where the ground dipped into a shallow hollow. At its center stood the remains of a stone structure, once a chapel perhaps, now covered in ivy and moss. Cracked pillars leaned at odd angles, and broken stained-glass windows scattered colored light across the forest floor. The scene was both beautiful and sorrowful, a forgotten place frozen in time. The maid stepped forward and ran her fingers over a stone, tracing the curves of a carved pattern that had been worn away by years of wind and rain. "This place remembers love and betrayal," she whispered. "It is old, older than the kingdoms around it. It has seen joy and heartbreak alike." The king stepped closer, his eyes scanning the ruins. "And what does it say to you?" She looked up at him, her expression serious. It warns those who carry burdens like yours. Power is not evil, but it can blind the heart. You must be careful what you allow to grow in the shadows of your soul." The king's jaw tightened. No one had ever spoken to him like this. Not a soldier, not a noble, not even the wisest advisor in his court. She spoke with truth, yet without accusation. It unnerved him, and yet it drew him closer. Suddenly, a rustle of wings echoed through the clearing. A pale light flickered among the trees, and the king instinctively moved to shield the maid. From the shadows emerged a creature, neither entirely bird nor entirely human. Its eyes glimmered like molten gold, and its feathers shimmered in the moonlight. The maid stepped forward, unafraid. "It is not here to harm us," she said calmly. "It is a guardian, watching for those who enter with intent." The creature tilted its head, regarding the king with an almost human curiosity. For a moment the forest seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a sound like wind over stone, it lifted and vanished into the dark. The king exhaled slowly. "I am not used to creatures like this," he admitted. "In my kingdom we rely on soldiers, on walls, on rules, not spirits and guardians." The maid's eyes softened. "The forest is older than kingdoms. Its rules are older than laws. Here, power alone cannot protect you. Only understanding and respect and courage." He nodded slowly, realizing the truth in her words. In his castle he had faced armies, treachery, and rebellion. But here in the forest his strength mattered little. Only his heart and his choices mattered. They moved deeper into the ruins and the air grew colder. Shadows stretched like fingers across the stone floor, and the wind whispered faintly through broken windows. The king felt a strange pull, as if the forest itself wanted to reveal something, something long hidden. "Do you feel it?" the maid asked, her voice low. "Yes," he admitted. "Like it is watching, waiting." The maid nodded. "It is. Some things sleep for centuries. Others wait for the right person to awaken them. Sometimes the right person carries both danger and salvation." The king looked at her, puzzled. "And which am I?" She studied him silently for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Perhaps both." As they continued through the ruins, a faint glow appeared ahead. The floor of the chapel seemed to shimmer, and the air was heavy with the scent of flowers that grew nowhere else. The king felt his pulse quicken. He had seen many wonders, faced countless enemies, but this quiet, magical world, stirred something deep within him. The maid stopped at the glowing center. "This place is sacred," she said softly. "It holds memories of those who have loved and lost, who have fought and forgiven, who have fallen and risen again. Some come here seeking answers, others seeking themselves." The king knelt beside the glow, mesmerized. He could feel something moving within him, a warmth he had not felt in years, a whisper of hope and courage. "I do not know what I am seeking," he admitted. The maid sat beside him, close but not touching, her eyes reflecting the soft light. "Sometimes we do not need to know. Sometimes we only need to see." The forest seemed to sigh around them, and the ruins echoed faintly with whispers of the past. The king felt a chill, not of fear, but of anticipation, as if the world itself was preparing him for something. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled. A low rumble shook the stones, and a shadow moved at the edge of the clearing. The king rose instantly, placing himself between the maid and the source of the movement. From the darkness emerged a figure, tall and cloaked in shadows, with eyes that gleamed like fire. The king's hand went to his sword, yet he sensed no ordinary danger. This was something different, something older than any foe he had faced in his kingdom. The maid stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "It knows you," she said, "and it has come to test you." The shadowed figure stopped at the edge of the glow. Its gaze locked onto the king, and he felt a strange sensation, as if his deepest fears and regrets were laid bare before this being. His chest tightened, his hands trembled slightly, and for the first time he felt powerless. "What do you want?" he demanded, though his voice was steadier than he felt. The figure's eyes softened just a fraction. "To see if you are worthy," it said, its voice echoing like wind through the ruins. "To see if you can face what lies within and emerge changed." The king's eyes met the maid's. She nodded slightly, her gaze steady. "You can face it," she said. "I believe in you." He drew a deep breath, feeling the weight of his crown, his power, and his past settle on his shoulders. And then he stepped forward, not as a king commanding soldiers, but as a man confronting his own darkness, guided by the quiet strength of the maid beside him. The shadow shifted, forming a doorway of mist and moonlight. "Enter," it said. "Face the truth or be lost." The king hesitated, feeling fear, doubt, and temptation all at once. He could turn back, leave the forest, return to his castle and the familiar rules of power. Yet he knew he would never be the same. He would always wonder what lay beyond. "I will go," he said, his voice firm. "Because I must." The maid reached out, brushing a hand against his arm. "You are not alone," she whispered. "Even if it feels like it, you are never alone." Together they stepped into the glowing doorway, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. The air shimmered around them, and the ruins faded, replaced by a place that felt both unreal and true. The king could sense the forest's magic, old and powerful, and he knew that the journey he had begun was only just starting. He felt the weight of his past, the fears of his present, and the uncertainty of the future pressing against him. Yet he also felt something new, courage born from trust, hope born from connection, and a spark of something he had not felt in decades, the possibility of redemption. The maid walked beside him, her presence steady and unwavering. And for the first time in many years, the king allowed himself to believe, not in the power of a crown, nor the fear of enemies, but in the strength of a quiet heart guiding him through the shadows. Above them, the moonlight danced through the trees, painting silver patterns across the forest floor. And somewhere, deep in the ruins and whispers of the past, the forest watched and waited for what would come next. The moment they stepped through the glowing doorway, the world shifted. The ruins and the forest behind them vanished, replaced by a landscape bathed in silver light. Mist swirled around their feet, and tall, ancient trees arched overhead like protective sentinels. Strange flowers glowed softly in the darkness, their colors unlike anything the king had seen before. The air hummed with magic, thick and alive, as if the world itself were breathing. The Alpha King's hand instinctively went to the hilt of his sword, but the maid placed a gentle hand over his. "Not here," she whispered. "This is a place of truth, not of battle. You must face yourself, not others." He studied her, startled by the calm in her voice. "Face myself?" he asked. "What do you mean?" The maid's eyes held a depth that made him swallow hard. "The forest, the magic, it shows what lies hidden in the heart. It will not harm you unless you harm yourself first. You must see your fears, your regrets, your darkness." The king felt a shiver crawl along his spine. He had ruled kingdoms, commanded armies, and defeated enemies, yet he had never faced the weight of his own heart in such a raw way. He nodded slowly, though uncertainty pressed against his chest. "Then show me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The mist thickened, wrapping around them like a living veil. Shapes began to form within it, shadows of the past, echoes of mistakes and regrets, fears and failures that he had tried to bury for decades. He saw the faces of those he had lost, the lives he had changed by his decisions, the anger he had allowed to grow unchecked. His chest tightened, and for the first time he felt the weight of his crown not as authority, but as a burden that crushed his soul. The maid stayed close, her presence steady and reassuring. "Do not fight it," she said softly. "See it, feel it. Only then can you understand it and yourself." He took a deep breath, letting the shadows swirl around him. At first he recoiled, anger and shame rising like fire. But the maid's calm voice, her unwavering gaze, reminded him that he was not alone. He began to move through the visions, confronting each memory with honesty. He saw the fear in the eyes of those he had commanded harshly, the pain caused by choices made for power instead of compassion. He saw his loneliness, the walls he had built around his heart to protect himself, and the curse he had lived with silently, an inability to trust, to love, to connect without fear of losing everything. The maid reached out, her hand brushing against his arm. "You carry this alone," she said gently, "but you don't have to. Let me help you carry it." Her words struck him deeper than any sword. No one had ever offered such understanding, such acceptance. His heart ached with longing, the desire for connection he had tried to deny for so long. He looked at her, truly looked, and saw not just a quiet, observant girl, but a spirit of courage and compassion, steady and unwavering. The shadows shifted again, darker now, more threatening. They took shape, twisted forms of beasts and shapes he recognized from his own fears, failure, betrayal, and isolation. The king drew his sword instinctively, yet he remembered her words. "Not here," she had said. "This is a place of truth, not battle." He lowered the sword, closing his eyes. The shadows advanced, circling him, whispering doubts and regrets. Yet he did not flinch. He felt the maid's hand on his shoulder, grounding him, reminding him that he was not facing this alone. Slowly he opened his eyes and focused on the center of the clearing, where a pool of light shimmered like liquid silver. He stepped toward it, each step heavy with the weight of his own darkness. As he reached the pool, the shadows recoiled, their whispers growing faint. He gazed into the silver water and saw not only himself but the potential he carried, the capacity for redemption, for love, for change. The realization struck him with overwhelming force. His curse had never been his strength or power, but his fear of connection. He had built walls to protect himself, yet in doing so he had imprisoned his heart. The maid knelt beside the pool, her reflection merging with his. "You see now," she said softly. "You can choose. You can let the past define you, or you can rise above it." He reached out, touching the water, and felt a warmth spread through him. The shadows around him shivered, their forms dissolving into mist. For the first time in decades, he felt the weight on his heart lighten, replaced by a fragile, glowing hope. The maid smiled faintly. "You are stronger than you know," she said. "Stronger because you dared to face yourself." The king looked at her, emotion breaking through his usual stoicism. "And you have shown me what I could not see alone," he whispered. "Your courage, your patience, it has saved me from myself." She shook her head gently. "I did not save you, you saved yourself. I only walked with you." A new sound stirred in the clearing, a low hum, almost like a heartbeat. The air shimmered, and from the mist emerged a figure glowing faintly. It was neither entirely human nor entirely spirit, but its presence radiated wisdom and calm. "You have faced your truth," the figure said, its voice echoing softly, "and you have chosen to rise. But there is one more test for both of you. True strength is not only facing oneself, but facing the world together without fear or doubt." The king exchanged a glance with the maid. She nodded once, and he felt a strange courage, a willingness to confront whatever came next, not as a king alone, but as a man guided by trust and connection. The figure extended a hand, and the mist parted to reveal a path, winding deeper into the forest. Strange lights flickered along the way, illuminating symbols carved into stones and trees. The king realized that this path was not only a journey outward, but inward, a path to understanding, to redemption, and to the bond forming between him and the maid. As they began to walk, the forest seemed to respond to their presence. The air felt lighter, the shadows softer, and the faint whisper of wind carried words that felt like encouragement. The maid walked ahead but glanced back often, her eyes calm and steady, offering reassurance without words. The king felt a growing awareness of himself, of her, and of the world around them. He had been a ruler, feared and respected, but he had never understood what it meant to truly lead, not with fear, not with power, but with compassion and trust. And in the presence of the maid, he saw a glimpse of what that could be. The path led them to a clearing where a single tree stood, its branches wide and welcoming, leaves glowing faintly like stars. Beneath it lay a pool of water, its surface perfectly still. The maid knelt beside it, her reflection merging with the silver light. "This is the heart of the forest," she said. "It mirrors not only what is within you, but what could be. Step forward if you are ready." The king knelt beside her, gazing into the water. He saw his own reflection, but also hers, and between them, a light that seemed to grow with every heartbeat. The realization struck him. This journey was not only about facing his own darkness, but about learning to trust, to share, and to connect. "I am ready," he said quietly. The maid reached out, taking his hand. "Then let us walk together," she whispered. The water shimmered, rising slowly to surround their joined hands in a soft glow. The forest seemed to hum with life, the shadows retreating, the air warm and gentle. The king felt a peace he had not known in decades, a sense of purpose not tied to a crown or sword, but to connection, courage, and love. And yet, even as the light embraced them, a faint ripple of unease passed through the king's heart. The forest was alive, powerful, and old. It had shown him truths, but it also held mysteries he could not yet understand. Somewhere beyond the glow, a voice whispered his name, faint and distant, carrying a warning that the journey was not yet complete. He looked at the maid, her eyes steady and full of quiet strength. "Whatever comes next," he said, "we face it together." She nodded, her hand squeezing his gently. "Always," she said. The mist swirled around them, and the forest whispered secrets older than kingdoms. The Alpha King, once alone and burdened by a curse, now felt a spark of hope, tempered with the knowledge that the path ahead would demand courage, trust, and unwavering hearts. And as they rose from the water, hand in hand, the forest seemed to sigh, as if acknowledging that the first steps of true transformation had been taken. But beyond the trees, hidden in the shadows, a distant figure watched, its eyes gleaming with a secret that threatened to test both the king and the maid, and to challenge the bond they had just begun to forge. The forest was quiet, yet the silence was heavy, almost waiting. The Alpha King and the quiet maid stood side by side beneath the ancient, glowing trees, their hands intertwined. The light of the forest shimmered around them, reflecting in their eyes like liquid stars. For a moment it felt as though time itself had paused, holding its breath in reverence of what had been accomplished and what was still to come. But even in this moment of calm, a sense of tension lingered. From the shadows beyond the glowing circle of light, a figure watched. Its presence was almost imperceptible at first, a flicker of movement, a whisper of wind that carried with it something older than kingdoms. The king sensed it, the hairs on the back of his neck rising as instinct whispered a warning. "Something waits," he said quietly, his voice steady but low. "I can feel it." The maid nodded, her grip on his hand tightening. "Yes, the forest does not reveal its secrets all at once. Some truths must be faced together and fully." He drew a deep breath, feeling a calm resolve settle over him. For the first time, he understood that his strength alone would not see them through. True power was in trust, in partnership, in the courage to face fear without turning away. And beside him, the maid's quiet courage radiated, steady and unwavering, giving him the confidence he needed. The shadowed figure stepped forward, revealing itself fully. It was neither human nor beast, but a guardian of the forest, older than memory and bright with a strange, otherworldly light. Its eyes were deep pools of wisdom, and its voice echoed like wind through ancient stone. "You have walked far," the guardian said. "You have faced the darkness within and the truth without, but the final test remains. Only by uniting your hearts and your courage can you claim the redemption you seek." The king met the maid's gaze. There was no fear in her eyes, only calm understanding. She nodded slightly, a silent affirmation that they were ready. "What is the test?" the king asked. The guardian's gaze swept over them. "A trial of truth, of sacrifice, and of trust. You must confront the shadows of the past not as individuals but as one. Only then will the bonds you share, and the hearts you protect, stand unbroken." The mist of the forest began to swirl around them, thickening into a vortex of light and shadow. Images formed within the swirling mist, visions of his past failures, the faces of those he had lost, the moments of pride turned to regret. And among them appeared the maid's own memories, losses, fears, and moments of doubt she had carried silently. The king felt a shiver of fear. This was more than a test of skill, it was a test of heart. He could fight armies, command kingdoms, yet these visions struck at his very soul. "Do not falter," the maid whispered. "We face it together." He nodded, drawing strength from her words. The mist surged forward, threatening to envelop them, yet they held each other's hands, their grip firm, their hearts synchronized. Step by step, they moved through the swirling visions, acknowledging each memory, each shadow, each fear. He faced the weight of his crown, the loneliness he had hidden behind power, the mistakes he had made in his quest for control. She faced the losses that had shaped her, the doubts she had carried, the quiet pain she had endured to survive. And together they stood firm, refusing to let the shadows divide them. "Together," the king said, his voice steady, "we are stronger together." "Always," she echoed. The forest responded to their unity. The swirling mist began to part, and the shadows of their past dissolved like morning fog under sunlight. The glow of the ancient trees intensified, and a warmth spread through the clearing, wrapping around them like a protective embrace. The guardian stepped forward, its form radiating approval. "You have chosen wisely," it said. You have faced yourselves and each other. You have allowed trust and courage to guide your hearts. The curse you carried is lifted, not by force, but by understanding, compassion, and unity. The king felt a lightness in his chest, a freedom he had not known in decades. The burden of fear, of isolation, of unspoken sorrow began to lift. For the first time, he could see the world not as a kingdom to rule or a crown to bear, but as a place to live fully, to love, and to grow. He turned to the maid, gratitude and emotion filling his eyes. "You have shown me a path I thought I could never walk," he said. "I was lost and you guided me without asking for anything in return." She shook her head gently. "I only walked beside you. You found the courage inside yourself. That is the true strength." For a long moment, they simply stood together, hand in hand, feeling the magic of the forest and the connection that had grown between them. There was no need for words. Their hearts spoke more clearly than any language could convey. Yet even in this moment of peace, the forest whispered of new beginnings. The guardian's eyes softened as it spoke again. "The forest has given you a chance to see yourselves and each other clearly. Now you may step forward into the world beyond these trees, stronger, wiser, and united." The king and the maid exchanged a glance, and then together they stepped from the glowing circle. The forest behind them shimmered one last time, then returned to calm silence, as though it had been waiting patiently for them to learn its lessons. The first rays of dawn broke through the trees, spilling light across the forest floor. Birds began to sing, and the air was filled with the scent of new life. The king looked around, seeing the world anew, not as a place of conquest, but as a place of beauty, possibility, and hope. "Do you feel it?" the maid asked softly, her eyes bright. "Yes," he said. "I feel alive, free, not just as a king, but as a man, and it is because of you." She smiled, a gentle, radiant smile that seemed to warm every shadow in his heart. "And I feel the same. You have shown me that courage is not just about facing danger, but about trusting, loving, and walking together through uncertainty." The king nodded, his gaze softening. "Then let us walk together always, not as ruler and subject, but as equals, as partners, as something stronger than titles." The maid squeezed his hand gently, her eyes shining with quiet joy. "Yes," she said, "together." The forest behind them seemed to sigh in approval, its secrets safe, its magic quieted, and its lessons learned. But even as the sun rose, painting the sky with gold and pink, a sense of wonder lingered. The world was vast, filled with challenges and mysteries, yet now they would face it side by side, their hearts no longer weighed by fear or regret. As they emerged from the edge of the forest, the first sights of the kingdom appeared: the distant castle, the rivers glinting in the dawn, the fields stretching endlessly. The king felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had learned that true power was not in ruling with fear or commanding obedience, but in leading with heart, understanding, and courage. And now, he had someone to walk beside him, someone whose quiet strength matched his own. The maid looked at the rising sun, breathing deeply. "The world is waiting," she said, "and we are ready." The king smiled, feeling the weight of his crown no longer as a burden but as a responsibility tempered by wisdom and love. "Then we go forward," he said, "together." And so they walked, hand in hand, leaving the forest behind but carrying its lessons within their hearts. The kingdom awaited them, full of challenges, mysteries, and opportunities. Yet the Alpha King and the quiet maid no longer faced it alone. Through the trials of the forest, through shadows of fear and echoes of the past, they had found each other, and in doing so had discovered something greater than power or titles. They had discovered courage, trust, and the transformative strength of a shared heart. The sun climbed higher, spilling light across the kingdom, as if blessing their new beginning. And though the world would continue to test them, both knew they were ready. Together they could face anything, because they had faced themselves and each other, and emerged stronger, wiser, and bound by a bond deeper than fear, greater than sorrow, and brighter than any crown. As the wind rustled through the fields and the castle bells chimed in the distance, the king glanced at the maid. "No matter what comes," he said, his voice steady, "we face it together." "Always," she whispered. And in that moment, the forest, the past, and the future seemed to converge, leaving only two hearts ready to meet whatever lay ahead, together, unbroken and free.